picking up the pieces of my sweet shattered dream.
Well, Sunday night, I was scrolling through Facebook and I saw some very sad news. The Leibers had passed away, and it was, I believe, from the New York Times that I saw that article, and I immediately thought of the Cressmans, and Barry and Lynn join us this morning. Good morning. Thank you for being here this morning, and very sorry to hear about the loss of your friends.
Well, it is sad for us, but we are relieved for them. At 96 and 97, they were frail, and they knew it. And as Gus said to Judy on Friday night, "Sweetie, it's time for us to go." And
really,
that's what he said to her. And he was still able to get around, but he was having difficulty breathing. And she had been bedridden for probably just a couple of weeks. She really was a very very determined lady, and so, you know, he always took the lead at their house, and he was her business manager, but also, you know, her very best friend. So we couldn't imagine one without the other. So for them, we are happy for them.
This is the story is incredible.
It is.
Barry, maybe you can set up this love story that has ties right here to Titusville and the region.
Well, it is an extraordinary story. Gus came from an exceedingly poor family. His parents were immigrants who arrived in New York, and then when Gus was just 3, came to Titusville. They had their home on New Street. Perhaps most of your listeners don't know where New Street is. It was a tiny little street. And Gus's father was a junk dealer. He traveled about the town with a horse-drawn cart, and he would pick up bits and pieces of junk that people would put out along the curb. He would try to mend them, resell them. It was in the days when people wrapped things in newspapers for mailing, before the day of bubble wrap and other sorts of styrofoam noodles, and he would sell that for wrapping. People would tie up their newspapers with string, and he would gather up the string and roll it into huge balls and resell it. So he's a very, very poor family. Gus was, though, from the start, an achiever and bright. He began as a paper boy for the Titusville Herald. He gained the favor of the then owner, publisher, E.T. Stevenson, who took a liking to Gus, and Gus moved into the copy room. He was probably sweeping the floors before then, typesetting eventually. Graduated at the top of his class in his graduation oration, which would have been in late May, early June 1939. He predicted the coming of World War I, which of course came just a few weeks later, and then himself entered the military, and at the end of the war found himself in Budapest, which is where he met Judy.
Wow.
It was a particularly, I don't know how much you want to know about this, it was a particularly difficult time for the little country of Hungary. Hungary had not wanted to be a part of the war, but Hitler basically forced Hungary's hand. Fairly early on in the war, Hungary established secret negotiations with the United States to leave the Axis powers. Hitler discovered that and went on a rampage into Hungary that would have been 1944, March of 1944. And that's when it really, really got bad for the people of Hungary. It had been bad before, but it really, really got bad, especially for the Jews in Hungary. Pre-World War II, there would have been about 650 Jews in Hungary. By the end of the war, there were about 200. Did I say 650? I meant 650,000.
Wow.
By the end of the war, there were 250,000. Roughly 400,000 were shipped off to Auschwitz. Judy's family was very fortunate. Through a variety of consequences or incidences, they were able to escape that. And so with the end of the war, Gus was with the intelligence and communications. He had raised doves when he was a boy, and continued to do that, by the way, into old age.
Really?
In our house at East Hampton, he
Wow.
raised doves, till maybe 10 years ago. So that's how they met. It was in Budapest. She was walking along the street. He was hanging around with a buddy. Their first date was at the Budapest Opera. And then they got married. He started continuing his education in art at the Budapest Art Institute, and brought Judy home with him in 1946. They settled in Brooklyn, and that's where the story begins, really.
Lynn, you've done such great work bringing this story to the attention of folks here, and especially at the high school level. And I think there's probably some people that say, you want to do what now? Talk about the reason, and I guess we should talk about the business side of it and how their business developed, maybe before we get to that part of it. But I'm also curious to just your excitement for making this more known, at least at the high school level in the community.
Well, I guess I should go back to how my relationship with Gus started. And probably the year 2000, Ken Winger said to me, Ken was our superintendent of schools, I'd like you to write an article for the School Matters, which is our district newsletter, about Gus Leiber. And I said, where do I find information? He said, we have a file at Scheide House. But then I said, can I call him? And Ken said, well, you can try, but he doesn't like to talk on the phone. So I tried, and the conversation was a good conversation. And so that began the relationship. Sometime after that, the next year, I got an invitation to an art opening, a show that was a Leiber show in the city. And Barry and I flew up to New York for the day, went to the showing, and introduced ourselves to Gus. And Gus said, well, are you here for the weekend? We said, no, we just came for the day. We came for your show.
Wow.
And he said, you came all that way just to see my artwork and to meet me? And we said, yes. That was the beginning. After that, Gus was very, very supportive of art in Titusville, and that was always his goal. He said, in high school, I knew I had artistic talent. He couldn't afford to go to college, and so he said, I want kids to see more art. And consequently, that was our goal from the beginning, was to get more art out to kids. And so he would buy prints and send them to us. He would send us monetary donations so that we could create the Leiber room, frame the artwork that he sent us, and try to get it out. And his big goal was, I want art in the halls. Now, our art teachers at the high school are absolutely wonderful, and they do have art in the halls. But we made that attempt to frame art and get it out for kids to see. So the relationship developed. We would go to New York to visit, and then over time, they invited us to their weekend home in the Hamptons, and we got to see his studios both in the city and at his home, and it was absolutely delightful. He began to realize soon that Lynn Cressman didn't know very much about art, and so he had to explain to me how to do things, how he wanted them done. And Gus was very forthright. The way he wanted it done was the way it was to be done.
Wow.
And so he did really help us learn about the art world. And so over time, we have built this collection, and our attempt is to make it available for the public, although you have to find the right venue. And presently we have a show at Benson Library. Now, it's a bit stark. It is a Holocaust poem by Isabella Leitner that he has illustrated. And because his wife's family came so close to being victims of the Holocaust, his portrayal of this poem, which is entitled May 31st, 1944, is stark. So I caution anybody who is going in to see it. It is very heavy, but that was a very heavy time for his family.
Now,
but that is our attempt to get it to the public.
Sure. Now you mentioned, okay, so he's an artist. Now, for those who may not know, I mean, he's not doing paint by numbers.
No.
No. So explain maybe to the audience how well known he was and how well known his works were to the world.
Well, he's a modernist, and that covers a vast ground in terms of territory. We have some of his works here. I don't know how well your camera can
with
pick
this
them.
one.
Let's start with that one over there.
Gus loved printing, and I think it began with his time at the Herald. He was an assistant printer at the time he was drafted into World War II. And so that love of printing stayed with him for quite a long time, and his biography lists 20 years of printing. And so his printing takes a lot of different forms. So this is one that he entitled Sharing, and it is, he sent it to us at Christmas time, and that was his interpretation of the term.
Maybe we'll have Mark take that camera there and just maybe zoom in on it. Yeah.
Okay. So the printing is really a major portion of his work. One of the gifts he gave us, gave to the Titusville School District, is a printing press. And it's an
Really?
antique printing press. Uriah Sampson and family made a trip to East Hampton to pick it up. And
Wow.
it is part of our collection. And that part of his career stayed with him for a long time. He would print his own Christmas cards, for example.
Really?
Yes. So printing was essential. One of the things that we found so interesting is a trip we took to New York at Christmas time, and I said, Gus, I've never seen an artist's studio. And he took us to a studio in New York, in the city. And he had sculpture in one corner, printing in another, painting another, watercolor someplace else. He was multi-talented, to say the least, but he did try and venture into a lot of different mediums. And so printing is one. And just as you hear of other artists in different periods of their lives, whether it's the blue period or the pink period, Gus had the same. And so when we go on here, we see a series he did regarding fishing villages. And we probably saw 20 of these different
series. He was
yeah.
fond of doing series.
Yes. No.
And so their whole series like that, which is a very happy series when you see it displayed on the walls of the museum that he and his wife built out in East Hampton.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, you think, oh, that's very colorful and beautiful. Right. But during the process of getting to know him, he explained the process behind.
I would say that he did not. He was very much an artist of the moment. Whatever mood he was in, you could tell from the paintings that he was doing. Now, that is very reminiscent of villages that you would see along the French Riviera or the Italian Riviera, for example. Very colorful. Houses are in pastels, yellows, pinks, maybe some bright reds tossed in. You see the blue of the sky in the background. It's a happy Mediterranean fishing village full of color. Now, something very different that he did. May I show this?
Sure, I think that's next.
He and his wife, of course, had lived in New York City since the 40s, and he had never been to Sagamore Hill, Teddy Roosevelt's home in Oyster Bay out on Long Island. And since I had grown up not very far from Sagamore Hill, I was familiar with it. And so we took them to see. He wanted to see. He and Judith both wanted to see Sagamore Hill. They'd never seen it. And when we got home a few weeks later, here was this painting. This is his impression of Sagamore Hill done in charcoal. Now, if you were familiar with Sagamore Hill, you might see some resemblance in terms of gables on the roof there. I'm looking at your screen right now. And there is a large tree right there by the front entryway to the mansion. But this would be, a very different kind of work. Mm-hmm. And then most recently, he sent us actually 3 of these as a gift.
And he called this improvisation. I have to say that Gus was a very, very literate person. He wrote the most wonderful letters, and I have all of them.
Really?
I do. And the titles to his artwork reflect that that love of words. He could have easily been a writer if he hadn't chosen to be an artist. But this is improvisation, and you see the lighthearted, and you see the light colors, and many of his later works look like this.
Now we should mention. Go ahead. Did you
and he was doing this kind of thing until probably, I don't know it, I would assume weeks, just a few months before his death. He would go out to his studio every day and do a little painting. Mm-hmm. He loved painting.
And that's one of the things his biographers note that's unusual for this man to be painting into his 90s, which he did. And his studio in the Hamptons was just outside his back door, so all he had to do was step out if he was so inspired, and he would paint a little. Now, and one big series that he did was about his gardens, and we should mention his gardens because they are noted in gardening magazines. In the 1950s, the Leibers bought this home in the Hamptons because it was the Springs is the name of the little village, and it had become a bit of an artist colony, and so they purchased this house, and then they began to purchase property around it and develop gardens, and the gardens are beautiful. And if you bought it in the 50s and it's now 2018, those gardens had a long time to grow, and they are beautiful. Wow. And he cultivated them. Now, they're not so much gardens in the sense of flowers, but in terms of shrubs and unusual trees. And so some of his paintings reflect that, the garden paths and so forth. So there was a whole series on his gardens, which are notable as well. And he studied gardening. He had books and books. He was an inveterate reader, and so he really was a student of many different things. He was just very well read. So
now, his wife also very talented.
Yes, yes.
And he played a major role in that. If she had not come to this country, no one knows what would have become of that talent. But very interestingly, her family had in mind for her a career in chemistry and the making of cosmetics. They had a relative who had developed a cream, an anti-wrinkle cream, and this is before the war now, and made quite a bit of money off of that. And so her parents decided
So the bar was set.
That's right. They would send her off to a King's College in London. And so she went off in the early summer of 1939 to England to find a place to stay while a student there. Came back later in the summer, and then, of course, the war came very early in September. And at that point, she was unable to leave continental Europe to get to England. But during that period of time, unable to study chemistry in London, she decided that she would learn how to make pocketbooks. Now, I believe she used to tell us that her dad would bring back pocketbooks from his various travels. He was in banking, the selling of commodities, that kind of thing. And so he would be away. He would be in Vienna. And he would come, for example, and he would come home with a magnificent pocketbook. And Judith, as a child, if my memory is accurate, loved those pocketbooks and during the war. It was possible at that stage in the war, even though she was Jewish, to learn how to make pocketbooks from start to finish.
Wow.
And when she came to the States, she brought that talent with her and worked for a woman named Nettie Rosenstein, who was a big name in fashion design in the 20s, the 40s, into the 50s. In fact, probably the first pocketbook of note was made while she worked for Nettie Rosenstein, who was invited by Mamie Eisenhower to create a dress for an inaugural gown to be worn at the inaugural ball in 1953, after Eisenhower was sworn in. And Judith designed the pocketbook.
Really?
Yes. It's on display
It's
in the
pink.
Smithsonian.
Wow.
It's pink.
It's
Yes.
Mamie's.
Mamie loved pink. We visited the farm in Gettysburg, and the bathroom, Mamie's bathroom, is all
pink.
Really?
And you can see that pocketbook. And that didn't stop, by the way, with Mamie. Virtually every first lady, certainly including the Bushes, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Reagan, all carried Judith Leiber pocketbooks at their inaugural balls.
Wow.
But by that time, she had her own firm.
In 1963, they finally decided it was time to go out on their own. And I say they because Gus was an integral part of that. Even though he was an artist, he was also an astute businessman, and he was her business manager, making a lot of decisions for her and the company. They worked very hard. He described delivering handbags to major retail stores in New York and traveling on the bus with a bundle of handbags and delivering them to the store himself at those early points in the business. And he talked about how Judy was an expert pattern maker, and she developed bursitis because she'd be down on the floor cutting patterns, and it was through a poor quality plating job on the frame of a bag that the famous Leiber bags were developed, because she got these frames. They were poorly done, and she was trying to decide what to do, and she thought, I'll cover them in Swarovski crystals. And so that's how it began. And of course, if you look at any of her books, and there are books about Judy, I don't know if you can reach that one, Barry. The variety of bags is absolutely extensive. Some of them are whimsical, they're tomatoes, they're turtles, and some of them look like Tiffany windows. So, and in addition, she does do leather bags as well, but she is most noted for these crystal bags. And they became the piece that everyone wanted. And I said to her, she had, design after design. I said, did you ever worry about not being able to come up with a new idea? And she said, oh, yes. That was the panic that was always there. What am I going to do this year? They would get indications from Italy as to what the color of the year was going to be, but then she would have to come up with a design. And one of the things they often did with us was take us to museums, and they spent a lot of time in museums, and I think she was searching for ideas, a shape, a design, something new. And so that was
That's incredible when you look at the two of them and how well they fit together.
Well, and that that was our concern as they got older. What happens if one of them passes before the other? Because they were an incredible team. Gus was that businessman. He also had that artistic, obviously, eye. So he knew what was good and what wasn't. But she also had that, and she truly loved her business. When they sold the business, she sold her name, because Judith Leiber Inc. was the name of her company, and she was kind of at loose ends. She had worked very hard all of her life, and really didn't quite know what to do with herself. So she started designing silver for tabletop silver, and she couldn't use her own name, and so the company did not take off, and I think that had to be hard for her. But she was just used to that work, and fashion competition in New York was something it's another world, and she was accustomed to that.
Yeah, as Frank Sinatra's put it, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere.
That's right. Did they ever make it back to visit Titusville?
The last time Gus came back was for his 50th class reunion, and he was here. He said it's a long trip. That was his comment. And so he didn't come back after that, but he did get to see the Leiber room and see what we had done. And he provided the appropriate critique, and we made those adjustments immediately. And so Judy was here once when she first was married to Gus. So did they get back here often? No.
And if folks want to see more of their works, they can do that by stopping into Benson Memorial Library?
They can. For the month of May,
Okay.
the Isabella Leitner illustrated poem will be on display. There is artwork in various parts of our school buildings. There is some artwork at Main Street School in the hallways there. There is artwork in the admin wing at the high school, in the boardroom, and some in the hallways in the high school office. So you can always stop in those places and visit as well.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in. And
thank
again,
you.
sorry for the loss of your friends. And it's a fantastic story, this couple and what they achieved and just the talent that they had. And
Yeah. It's a true story of rags to riches in terms of Gus Leiber, but the better story, I think, is the love story that you see in these two people who are utterly devoted to each other. And as you're right, they worked in tandem so well. And so, as I said, we're sorry. We're sorry for ourselves. We're sad for ourselves, but we are delighted for them.
all right. Thank you, guys. Thank you. And thank you for bringing in your collection. It's
Sure.
beautiful.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
We are very fortunate people.
Such a great interview, and then we have to go to Bruce Peterson. It's going to be... Bruce is coming up next.